Okay, Kevin, we are live.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to turn my camera on. I'm coming to you from a different location tonight, so hope everything works. It looks like my internet connection is a little bit sketchy. Hopefully, things will work out. Welcome, everybody. Bienvenidos a todos. Welcome to the 7th meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Police Policy. Committee. Welcome elected
officials. We're losing you, Kevin. You might want to try turning your...
And welcome to...
We're losing you. You might want to try turning your camera off.
Gotcha. Hopefully this will work. How is that?
That's improved.
All right. Let me welcome everyone to the meeting tonight. This is the 7th meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee, and we are a little bit more than halfway through our process. I want to read into the public record the items that were included in your information packet. So first and foremost is regarding the checks. If you have filled out a W-9 form with the city, you should have received the first of your 3 checks. Please tell me that that has happened. All right, I see a thumbs up. Excellent. If you filled out a W-9 form and you have not received your first stipend check, please let me know. If you've not yet filled out a W-9 form and want to, please contact CAS for assistance. Please know that you can only receive your stipend for your work on the committee if you fill out a W-9. And stipends, that the stipends are taxable. And let's see what else. The city cannot make a stipend payment if they do not have a W-9. The city cannot donate payments or the stipends the participants. Some of you have expressed that desire. The city's unable to do that. So the stipend payment must be received by you, and then you can decide to donate that if you wish. All right. I want to make a reminder to folks that on November 10th, this committee approved a motion that set aside no less than 45 minutes during the February 17th meeting to hear from citizen complainants about the process they undertook with the police auditor and the Civilian Review Board. The motion allowed including a video testimony in lieu of attending the Zoom meeting. If you have the names of citizen complainants who would be willing to provide testimony either on Zoom during the February 17th meeting or provide a pre-recorded video, please submit their names to CAS or myself so that we can begin contacting these folks and making arrangements for their testimony. We're thinking 3 to 4 people would be appropriate.
What kind of testimony are we asking about?
Item. The committee passed the motion that requested to hear testimony from citizen complainants about their process that they undertook with the police auditor and the Civilian Review Board. So that's what the committee decided.
Do we have anybody signed up already?
We've had a couple of expressions of interest forwarded to us by committee members. And we also have somebody who, again, has been forwarded to us by committee members who is not a citizen complainant, but a former police officer. The approach we'll be taking is we will, unless the committee is strongly against it, we will allow that person to submit video testimony and also potentially have them present at the meeting. But we will give priority, and I think it will be 3 slots basically of about 20 minutes each. We will give priority to citizen complainants, people who've actually been through the process before we hear from anybody else in the general vicinity of that process.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin, was there more on your announcement?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry.
Okay.
I want to let the committee know that CAS will be presenting a revised work plan for this committee, which basically lays out that we're not going to get an opportunity to get to some of the lower priority items on our list. So be prepared for that later on in the meeting. And just a reminder for all the folks that we've got 5 meetings remaining. The next one will be on February 2nd. The next meeting, number 9, will be on February 17th. Meeting number 10 is on March 2nd. Meeting 11, March 17th, and the final meeting, number 12, on March 31st. You'll notice, probably noticed in your information packet, that we are using a revised numbering system for the motions, which is intended to assign a permanent number to the motions that will live with that and stick with that motion as they travel through the process. So hopefully that will increase clarity on that. And finally, Alain Reyes Santos has resigned from the ad hoc committee, so we are sorry to see her go. Those are my announcements and welcoming remarks. Mo and Kaz, I'm going to attempt to sign in using a different internet. So I'm going to drop out here just for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kaz to talk about the revised work plan.
Thank you, Mo. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen in a moment. Okay. Let me know if you can see AHCPP revised work plan proposal. Mo? Okay. So yeah, essentially the general trend that the committee has taken is preferring to go deep rather than to cover issues, skim over issues. As a result, we've ended up taking up quite a lot of committee time on the top 4 and now today 5 issues. I've responded to that tendency within the committee. My guiding principles have been that we try to cover priorities 1 to 5 in detail, and these should take priority over items further down the list, and that the other topics don't need a subcommittee meeting. We don't really have time for subcommittee meetings on these issues, but also in many cases they are very straightforward proposals that the committee can either say yes or no to. So the proposed work plan is today, we're looking at independent investigation and prosecution. We'll look at outstanding motions, potentially from the Community Oversight Subcommittee, potentially from the Use of Force Subcommittee. I'll be led by the committee on that. And then we have the presentation, which DA Perlow and others are giving today, or rather the Q&A session based off of those presentations. On the next meeting, we will cover the issues in broken windows policing, cover any outstanding use of force motions, and motions from the hiring and training subcommittee if that committee is able to meet. That's an item we'll get to later on today. We've struggled to find a time for that committee to meet. Then on Wednesday the 17th, we're proposing to have community representation and testimony as per the motion that was passed last year. And on the 2nd of March, any items from community policing and outstanding motions from whichever bodies have managed to meet by that time. Wednesday, March 17th, demilitarized police and any outstanding motions. And Wednesday, March 31st, motions from the end for-profit policing theme of Campaign Zero, and then the presentation of the final report, minus, of course, any motions that make it through that March 31st committee meeting. So that is in essence the plan that we're adopting. When it comes to items that don't fall under that, I will collate those based on the database that was put out. And members are strongly encouraged to contact me with any issues that they would like to ensure are discussed. So you can just contact me and say, oh, you know, number 25 in your list is an item on ending for-profit policing. I'd like that to make sure that comes up. And once we've taken care of that, we will be able to move forward. So I think with that, it's relatively straightforward. We're shifting away from this this sort of step-by-step process and allowing the committee to cover things going forward. I don't know if anyone has any questions or if what I've done is fairly self-explanatory.
We're not voting on this evening, are we?
It's not a question of voting on it. Basically, I'm putting it in front of the committee to let them know how we're going to be structuring things going forward. Existing schedule, proposed schedule. If anybody has any further comments, please contact me, and we will try to work your comments into the schedule going forward. But the way things stand, we've covered the top priorities in extensive detail, and the other stuff we simply do not have time for. So we're going to need to find some way to get around that.
When can we get the list of the additional items that are not on there?
So the additional items that aren't on there are Enbroken Windows policing, community representation, sorry, not community representation testimony, just community representation, community policing, demilitarization, and ending for-profit policing. Those items we don't have time to cover in the same way that we've covered them up until this point, but we can still identify specific issues or specific motions that we'd like to put on those subjects. And depending on how many we get back from committee members, we can deal with them as they arise. There's also a bit of overlap. For example, the use of force motions. One of them refers to getting rid, that we'll have a presentation from Marty today, refers to getting rid of weapons of war, which is a demilitarization motion as well as a use of force motion. So yeah, there's a fair bit of overlap. There's some things that just aren't really police policy. So broken windows policing, for example, is more about city ordinances around low-level crime than it is about city policy.
Hi there. I have a question about the final report.
Brian,
Sure.
Brian, Daniel had his hand up.
Oh,
So I'm going to call on Daniel and then Brian.
So I see that police union contracts are completely off in terms of there's no presentation, there's no discussion, there's nothing about that.
Yeah, that was the very final item on the list. And again, members are welcome to bring any motions on that to us, and we would try to find a way of fitting them in. But they were the very final. They weren't on even the initial work plan that we had put together because they were so far down the list. We simply couldn't fit them in. But yeah, if you have any motions on that, please submit them to us. And towards the end, we would try to find some time to just rattle through a bunch of motions, because as we're going forward, we're going to have no presentations, which means that the entire meeting will be dedicated to passing motions, either those that have come from subcommittees or those the members put forward.
Thanks. And Brian?
in terms of the March 31st report approval, when are we going to receive a draft of the final report?
Our intention at the moment is to get that out as soon after the March 17th meeting as possible, so it's as complete as possible. But I'm afraid I can't give you a precise date. We will make sure that it's in time to be able to read the report.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions for Kaz? I'm trying to go through and look at all your faces, but I can only see 5 at a time. I think we're good. Thank you, Kaz.
Okay.
So now we're going to move to question and answer session on independent investigation and prosecution. So we have District Attorney Patty Perlow, we have Deputy Police Auditor Leah Pitcher, and who's here from EPD?
Cindy Coleman
I
is
see
here from
Patty.
EPD.
Okay, and Cindy Coleman from EPD. So could the 3 of you just take just a second to introduce yourselves, and then we'll let the group ask questions? Why don't we start with you, Patty?
Good evening. I'm Patty Perlow. I'm the elected district attorney for Lane County. I've been in the DA's office for, it'll be 31 years at the end of this month. I was appointed as DA by Governor Brown in 2015, elected in 2016, and elected again in 2020. And it is my responsibility to review officer use of deadly force within Lane County.
Thank you. And Leah?
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm the Deputy Police Auditor. I'm Leah Pitcher, and I've been in our office for 10 years. And yeah, you guys have seen me a lot by now, so I'll stop talking.
Thank you. And Cindy?
Good evening. I'm Cindy Coleman. I'm the Professional Standards Manager with Eugene Police Department. I've been with the department for over 25 years, and currently I'm leading the internal affairs section as well as policy development and quality assurance.
All right, thank you. So now is your time, committee, to ask questions related to what you saw on the presentations or what you wish you had seen on the presentations. If you're able to use your hand raise function in the participant list, that would be the easiest for me, but I will do my best to go back and forth between your faces too. Who wants to start us off? Marty.
So I want to start off with a maybe stupid question. When we talk about independent investigation, my assumption was that it was independent from law enforcement, meaning that you bring someone in who is not involved in law enforcement. But from the presentations, I gathered that it can mean sending it to a different law enforcement agency than the department that is being contested. So when you are speaking in your presentations about independent investigation, is that what you mean? Can you clarify that for the public record?
So an independent investigation means that the investigation is not conducted by the agency that was involved in the use of force incident. So we have, per Senate Bill 111, created the IDFIT team, and that means that a team of other agencies are investigating that use of force and not the involved agency. It's a criminal investigation, so it's always going to be some law enforcement body that's investigating it. And so the other alternative would be to have the Attorney General's office run those investigations, and she has declined that. She has presented to the legislature a budget that is so high to take on that body of work that the state would never adopt that.
Is it not true within the scope of 21st Century Policing and Campaign Zero that in other places across the country, individual municipalities have elected to put together a body of civilians who conduct these, especially the high profile cases, and it's being done by people who are not intricately involved in law enforcement.
If that's the case, then it would not be a criminal investigation. Criminal investigation requires law enforcement for the collection of evidence, for the processing of any search warrant that might be required, for questioning witnesses. It's a specific trained activity that you wouldn't just hand over to a citizen committee to conduct a criminal investigation to present to the district attorney for potential prosecution. There are civilian review boards that follow up afterward to review the criminal investigation.
Okay, that was my question about the oversight, because it seems to me that, for example, in your presentation, you made a statement about the good record that the county has of not having indicted police officers. But it seems to me a conflict of interest, because that good record reflects upon your career. So it would give you incentive to maintain that good record. And that seems like would be good evidence for why we would need somebody who is not involved in that circle to be chiming in, especially to have some disciplinary authority in that situation.
So I'm responsible for the prosecution of all felony crimes in Lane County. And so because that's my responsibility, that's why I do this body of work. I did request the Attorney General to take this over, and it was declined. There aren't any, the Attorney General doesn't have original authority to initiate a criminal case except in certain circumstances. And so it would have to be through appointment of the governor to be allowed to do this work. I asked for it, it was denied, and so this remains my responsibility. It is not that we haven't prosecuted police officers when there is sufficient evidence to support that a crime was committed. We do in fact prosecute police officers. My comment that you heard is a reflection of the fact that the law enforcement officers who have used deadly force in our county during the time that I've been reviewing them have all been lawful, justified use of force. And as soon as the investigation is over, I have made all of the materials available to particularly the media. They used to come in actually and review each of those cases very thoroughly. Given the state of our current media, what happens now is they ask for highlights, but the files are completely open for review.
So just in closing, and then I'll move on. That justification is based on the codes the way they're currently written. If we were to advocate for codes that are stricter, would you support and be open to following up that stricter code in such a way that some of these cases that you've already seen would have been interpreted as unreasonable?
So as I mentioned, it's a criminal investigation, and so it would require a legislative change to the law to change the justification for use of deadly force in defense of self or others. And a person can't be prosecuted retroactively to a change in the law now for conduct that was happening before. You can change statute of limitations as they've done in sex crimes and all, but you can't change the elements of a crime and go back and prosecute somebody for some conduct that wasn't illegal at the time.
No, but going forward, would you then support the stricter protocols?
I will follow the law, whatever it is. So if the legislature does not, now keep in mind that it's not just going to be police officers, that people in their homes would be subject to the same ability to defend themselves or others as a police officer would. And so you have to think about the total consequences of what happens when you make a change to the law.
Thank you. I've got Justin, then Silver, then Daniel, then Ibrahim. So Justin?
Yeah, I just have a question about Jason Barrett's presentation, specifically in regard to service complaints. He said that there's no disciplinary action specifically for service complaints. What is done specifically when service complaints are made in regards to police officers' demeanor towards specific individuals? And what happens if they're in excess?
Can field that one. So service complaints by their classification by the auditor, they certainly can uncover that there was a performance issue. An employee can receive corrective action, pre-disciplinary, which would be coaching, that kind of thing, but it's not going to rise to a level of discipline, which in our case is oral reprimand would be the lowest discipline level.
Sure. So what happens when there are multiple service complaints, specifically in reference to demeanor, in regards to if all these service complaints are similar or consistently addressing the same issue? At what point do you have disciplinary action?
So if we see a trend and we meet, when I say we, Internal Affairs meets with the auditor's office as well as our senior staff regularly regarding all of our complaints. So if we see a trend happening with a particular officer, that is something that we could look at closer. And that could be handled a number of different ways, but that is something that we do pay attention to. Sometimes, if there's a trend, an officer could even be put on a performance improvement plan, which isn't necessarily discipline, but it is making sure that the officer is aware of expectations.
Sure. So with that, there's no increased monitoring for that officer in regard to those complaints.
I would say that there is an increase in monitoring in the sense that we'd be paying attention as complaints came in. As to an auditor has access to that as well. So that could potentially weigh their decision on classification.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on that really quick, that if we are getting complaints that are complaining of what is minor misconduct, which would result in a service complaint, that's how we apply it. But if we're getting a officer, then Mark and I would definitely take that into account when we're classifying. We independent aliens, but we understand that complaints don't result in discipline. So if we think something needs to result in discipline, we'll probably classify it as an allegation of misconduct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Silver?
So I understand that the prosecutor has the ability to change the kind of timeline from when a video is released from a crime, specifically with the recent shooting on November 30th. Is that true?
So it's for good criminal investigation, you don't make a video public before all of the witnesses are interviewed, because once that video is out there, then everyone will have been able to see it prior to their interview taking place. And so what we're looking for in interviewing witnesses is what their perspective was at the time, what they perceived, what they saw, not what a camera that perhaps is from a different angle viewed. And so it isn't until the investigation is complete and all the witnesses are interviewed that we release that video. And it's just to protect the integrity of the investigation. Once the witnesses are interviewed, the reports are done, and the case is concluded, everything's released immediately.
So again, are you the person who has the power to release the videos before that decision is made?
Yes,
Because that was my understanding.
yes.
So in the case of the November 30th shooting, which I think a lot of people sort of got turned around on when they saw the video, you had the power to release that footage as soon as December 1st, but it wasn't released until a few weeks later. Is that correct?
It was released as soon as the investigation was complete. As I said, no one who's doing a good job in a criminal investigation would allow witnesses to view a video prior to being interviewed.
I understand. You know, part of the thing that we're dealing with here is 21st century policing, and the fact that that now includes the ability for people to pull out a cell phone and make their own judgment on a moment's basis. And so it seems unreasonable to me to think that our system is making it so that we're going to take these measured steps. But if somebody was present at said event on November 30th, they could have released that video and they could have had a viral reaction, and people could have made a decision at a moment's notice on what happened and what took place. So
Right.
I'm trying to make it make.
Could be completely wrong based upon the perspective of the video and what that person, the timing that they came into it. I can't control what the public does with their own medium, but what I can do is make sure that all the facts are gathered and presented in full context so that the truth is what is ultimately revealed.
Right. So ultimately what I'm saying is if there was video footage that was taken by a private citizen, that's out of your jurisdiction. And if people wanted to release something like that, then I personally do not like the fact that we have cameras all over the place. And I'm a privacy person, I have major privacy concerns. But if that were the case, then the video footage could have been released beforehand.
If it's not in the control of police custody, I have no control over making people not release information. That's the sad state of social media today, where the public is drawing conclusions based on somebody's snippet of information that they put out there.
So part of the question that I have is the footage that we get from these police body cams, which I was a part of the policy making body that decided to put this the body cams forward. We don't consider that public information, not until it's been released through your office and through the process that we have set up.
Well, body cams are actually exempt from public record, but we go beyond in these incidents to make sure the public is confident in what happens in these use of force incidents. But as I said, the officer doesn't get to see the body cam footage of their own video until after they're interviewed.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got Daniel and then Ibrahim. You're muted, Daniel.
You actually just answered my first question about when police officers would have access to those videos. My second question is, you mentioned in your video that there were some incidents where EPD officers did not follow protocols. Is there any means by which the public will know of these protocol or policy violations that they happened, and also to know what consequences there might have been as a result of those policy or protocol violations?
So I have in each of my press releases pointed out when those events have occurred. And each one of them has been different. So, I'm sorry? So anyway, the consequence is that sometimes the investigation takes longer than we would like, because we have to backtrack and make sure that nothing in the chain of evidence was broken, and that witnesses who needed to be interviewed are located. And it's a different thing every time, but we have those conversations, and we try to do trainings with the agency, and hopefully there won't be another one, but assuming there is, each time we just hope that all of the protocols will be followed.
But the only way for the public to know is through your press releases, or is there some other formal channel of the public being made aware of those?
I don't know how else. I mean, the city is aware of it. They may make it public. I make it public. I don't know who else would be responsible for doing that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I don't see any hands up anymore. Ibrahim, did you?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
someone else lower my hand.
Okay. All right, it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, the district attorney position is an elected position, so you run campaign and you seek for support. And part of what the candidate do is to reach out to unions. And yourself, you have reached out to Eugene Police Department Association and Springfield and many more union. So when there is a deadly force use and you have to investigate, those same officers are represented by union. Do you see some kind of conflict of interest or a possibility that may affect or at least impact the investigation? And for a general reform, would you advise that that relationship, at least that involvement of the union in the district attorney's election, be some kind of somehow monitored or scrutinized, if not banned?
Well, I can tell you that, yes, I was supported by local law enforcement agencies. I don't have a personal relationship with anyone from any of the local law enforcement agencies. And in fact, even though the union has supported me, we have prosecuted police officers for criminal conduct. My responsibility is to the public, and my responsibility is to follow the law and to look at all of the evidence that's presented to me and make a determination of whether a crime was committed based upon evidence only. Now, if the public thinks that it's not a good thing for the DA to be responsible for these use of force incidents, I would encourage you to talk to the legislature, because I talked to the legislature and it didn't do any good. As I mentioned, I would be thrilled to have the Attorney General take responsibility for investigating the use of deadly force. But because that hasn't happened, and I don't see it happening in the foreseeable future, at least during my term in office, I am the person who is tasked with that. And that is why I have had a policy of making everything completely open as soon as the investigation is concluded, so the public can have confidence. That's why we have an independent investigation team through the IDFIT to investigate these cases. And I don't have another option at this point. I can ask another county district attorney to look at the case, take the case. But my experience is when asking another county to do that, they have their own workload and their own cases. And so it takes a long time for those cases that get referred from another county to make it to the top of their list. And the attention that they receive isn't necessarily the same level of attention that you get for the cases that come into your office yourself involving your own constituents. So it's not an ideal situation. I recognize that. The best I can offer you is to tell you that I have taken an oath to follow the law. And in my 31 years in the DA's office, every day I have gone into the office with the intention of doing the right thing. And so I have another not quite 4 years left to do this job. And if in 4 years, somebody else is going to step up, and maybe by that time, the legislature will have made a decision to fund the Attorney General's office to take over these cases.
Thank you. And I was not referring to you personally as having done anything wrong to that extent. It's just that I personally believe that this committee, this ad hoc committee, should consider bringing up the union relationship, at least the police union, as being one of the priorities, so we can have a full day to talk about it. And I thank you for your answer.
All right, Erica, and then David, and then Lindsay.
Good evening, everybody. I have two questions for the district attorney, and this is related to the case of Eliborio Rodriguez. These are questions from the family. How do you justify a shooting without a video that proves it? Second question, how do you feel day by day knowing that you justify a murderer?
So my job is not an easy one. And in that particular case, I wish that that circumstance had never arisen. And in fact, at the time that I had to make an announcement on that case, I made it quite clear that I didn't think that circumstance had to arise, that that contact had to happen the way it did. But what happened was, and we know that from the video, is a fight ensued, and that's when the body camera came off. And we had physical injury to the officer from his taser. So we know that Mr. Rodriguez got his taser and was stunning him with it in a fight. And it came to the point where the officer had to make the choice to use deadly force to keep himself from having his gun stolen. He was losing that fight. It was a fight that never should have happened, but once it did, the officer by law was entitled to save his own life.
But we know that the other person was not armed, and we know that
the other person was armed with the officer's. The other person was armed with the officer's weapon that he took.
Well, that is like those questions come from the family.
I know. I talked to the family at the time.
As a teacher, as a community teacher, when my students ask me things about police brutality, we talk about Floyd in class, teach for grade. So, as a teacher, I have to tell my students that, we people, make poor choices. And poor choices doesn't make us bad people. And even if we take poor choices, that doesn't mean that we deserve to die. So I really I teach this to my students. So I really wanna believe that we live in a community that the death, taking the life of a person, is not easily justified. I wanna believe that that we have a system that is trying to actually, create a society that we can actually live in without being fear of supposedly the people that is protecting us. Because, you know, as a person of color, I don't feel safe when I see police, and I'm a teacher. I work for the city, and I still don't feel safe. And I know for a fact that we teachers, even in the system, we discipline more people of students of color and indigenous and Black students. So how is it possible that you, being a district attorney, you are not aware of these kind of things? So what are you doing to avoid this kind of cases, specifically when it's related to
Erica, 30 seconds, please.
What are you doing as a district attorney to avoid these things happen over and over? Thank you.
So I am sadly aware of the systemic problem that occurs in this community and other communities with a different treatment of people of color than white people. But in this particular circumstance, that officer went to work that day, not expecting to get into that kind of fight and a fight for his life. And he had a right to go home that day. And so it's a terrible conflict that we have to make these, that I have to make these kind of decisions, that somebody had the right not to die that day.
So
But
what you're saying is that there is neighborhoods that people like me shouldn't be at?
no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I recognize that we have some challenges in the community that we need to address. We need to face up to them and address them. But that particular case was not about race.
What about Charlie Landeros' case?
Charlie Landeros took a gun into a school. Again, that case never should have happened. The school district should never have brought a custody battle into the school. When they brought the custody battle into the school, they created the conflict. And he came into the school with a gun, and when they tried to diffuse the conflict, he pulled the gun and tried to kill an officer. Again, it was a situation that never should have occurred. And I am as upset as any community member that that situation did occur. But the officer had a right to live when somebody pulled a gun on him and fired it.
I'm just hoping for better training, because it seems very sad that, you know, people who are highly trained, you know, the only thing they can do is kill someone and is justified. And they're really very sad how easy it is to dehumanize a person, like specifically talking about people.
Hi, Erica, sorry, your 3 minutes has expired.
Erica, do you want to finish your thought?
No, I'm just worried because, you know, is how easy is to dehumanize a person using the power of your voice, because you know that you have a power of your voice, you have the power of the media, you have a lot of power. And the way I have seen, you know, the justification of killing people is really sad. And as a teacher, I feel heartbroken, because how do I tell this to my students? You know what? If you do a wrong choice, you will be killed and it will be justified. I don't think that is something I want to teach. So I'm asking you, with the power you have, to help the community to be a better community, and justifying the killing of people of color, of any person within a custody dispute is not good. Or like this kind of things. I just am begging for a better word. I think as a community, we deserve better. Because, you know, if one day something happens, I don't want someone to tell me, you know, it was justified. You know, we don't even know who she is. Just in case, you know, I'm a teacher. So if you see me around, don't shoot me, even if I am in the wrong neighborhood.
Thank you. Patty, if you want to say anything more, feel free. I don't want to just skip over that.
I can tell you that meeting with the family members in any of these cases, well, in any case where they've lost a loved one, is one of the hardest jobs that I have. And those conversations are really difficult, but out of respect to these families, I always sit down with them to talk about it. And I am sorry that we have these circumstances. When you talk about my power, I would love to have a superpower that could change how things are here and everywhere else. The best thing that I think I can do is to continue to engage in outreach with meetings like this and with people in the community to give them confidence in the work that we're doing. But I don't have a superpower to change outcomes in different circumstances.
Maybe not allowing those people that hurt other people to go back to do their job because it's clearly they are not doing it well. Something like that, it can help. Because if they do it once, it can happen again. Why do we wanna wait for that? Like as an educator, I don't feel like this is the world I want my students to go live.
Right. Well, as an educator, you should be really upset that a school district or an employee at a school district would bring a custody dispute into a school. That is a unsafe thing to do.
I have read the case. I just feel like in a custody dispute, I don't think no one should be there. I don't think a kid should lose a parent in a custody dispute. I don't know how it happens, truly. With so much smart people.
This is super important, and it's okay, Erica. I appreciate your voice, and I appreciate you teaching. I'm gonna move us on. I have four more people, and we're running low on time. So I've got David, he got booted out and he came back, and then Lindsay. So David, you're up.
Yeah, I know, Patty, you talked about the Attorney General and having them prosecute their, oversee these cases. Is there any indication that there's interest in, I guess, I don't know if that would be a special prosecutor's office within the Attorney General's office, or is there another alternative, I guess, that you think communities can push for?
Well, for jurisdiction over all 36 counties, the Attorney General would be the logical choice for that. The Attorney General's office has prosecutors. What she presented to the legislature was a tremendous bill to be able to travel across all 36 counties, the size of Oregon, and that it would take too long. It would hold up investigations way too long to be able to get to the Eastern Oregon counties and to the coast counties and to Southern Oregon. And so it was pitched that her office take those counties that have over 400,000 people. To which I said, how about 380,000 people, so that Lane County could be part of that? Unfortunately, Marion County, who the DA is the president of the District Attorneys Association and has, her office right there in Salem and contact with the legislature, did not want that option. And so even in what was pitched to the legislature turned into being a Portland metropolitan area offer of how about the Attorney General takes over just these few counties. And even that, the bill that was presented to the legislature for conducting that body of work was ridiculously high. And so it didn't gain any traction.
Is this something that, obviously there are multiple spots to put pressure on. Are there any ones that you would see as the number one I mean, I think this is too important, and it puts local prosecutors in difficult situations where they're having to prosecute, people that are part of their system. So,
Well, I want to make it clear, we do prosecute people in our system. We do prosecute officers for unlawful use of force. We've prosecuted them for engaging in sexual misconduct. We prosecute officers for all the same things, DUIs, that the general citizenry commits. The only thing I'm asking the Attorney General to take with regard to police officers is the use of deadly force. And the Attorney General is an independently elected official and doesn't want this body of work any more than I do. So I think she's going to win this.
thanks.
Okay. Talk about Lindsay and then Ibrahim and then Justin.
Hi, thanks everyone for being here tonight. My question is also for Patty. So because I sit on the Civilian Review Board, I can see more documents and investigations than most people can see, watch more video. And I have, in the context of our current laws, usually agreed with your perspective on the justification in the end of the use of force, but I think I share concerns about the events leading up to the uses of deadly force. And so I was wondering if you could speak to any opportunities you think there would be for bolstering criminal law in the area of de-escalation or such things. In terms of the City of Eugene Police, at least on the police policy side, there's de-escalation policy that we continue to work on and refine. But on the criminal side, there really isn't anything that looks at that. And reading your statements, feel like you are more than intimating you share frustrations in the events leading up to the specific uses of force, but the law binds you to only consider at that moment that the officer uses the deadly force, whether or not it was justified and not the preceding things. Do you mind speaking to that a little bit?
So the things that lead to the use of force are generally policy and not anything that would be within my purview. The example of bringing the custody dispute into the school, that wouldn't be something that I can do anything more than put out there. That's not a good idea. And the same thing with each of these cases. I mean, the circumstances are so very different in every single one of them and what leads up to the ultimate use of deadly force. And so the policy, to try to legislate policy leading up to it, I think would be impossible, just given the vast array of facts of how we come to those situations, from traffic stops where somebody tries to run an officer over to, going into domestic violence situations and somebody's barricaded with guns. I mean, every single one of these has a different set of facts that leads up to it. And so the domestic violence person who's barricaded, all the de-escalation that takes place often doesn't change the fact that the person wants to be shot by the police and comes out of that house, apartment, whatever it is, with a gun drawn with the intent to be killed. We can't legislate against people who want to be shot by the police. And the other incidents, each one of them, if it's a violation of policy, the family has a civil remedy. If somebody's violating policy, then there are lawyers aplenty who will want to assist in engaging in a civil suit with the city for that conduct.
Okay, I think it's me now. I'm back with one more question. It's about the video of the incident either leading to use of deadly force. With the Brian Bath killing, I think the video went off just before the shooting and after, till like after he was dead. And with El Liborio, Mr. Rodriguez, we've seen that there was some interaction and then no video. I guess what I want to know is how trustworthy is a testimony of an officer who whose video failed before the use of deadly force. Is there a possibility to just dismiss their testimony because they forfeit the right to, for me, if the video, the camera recording the incident, some reason died or they turned it off purposefully. The second question I have is about the union. I don't know if during your meeting with the involved officer, are they represented by the union? Do they have a union rep during those meetings?
So to the first question, there isn't always video in use of force incidents. You happen to be involved with the Eugene Police Department who has body cam, but there are 11 law enforcement agencies within Lane County and not all of them have video. And so when there isn't video, regardless of whether it failed or there just isn't video, you have to look at the totality of the evidence and what the physical evidence supports with the statements that are being made by the witnesses. It's just like any other criminal investigation, whether you have video or not. You look at the totality of the circumstances, you take the statements and try to determine whether what they're saying is supported by other evidence. And so you don't, if it's supported by other evidence, you don't disregard it. If it isn't supported by other evidence, you have to determine whether there's evidence contrary to it, which would mean you would disregard it, or whether you're just at a neutral because somebody makes a statement and you can't prove or disprove it otherwise. And so it's just like any other criminal case. Now, on the second part of it, you're going to have to remind me what you.
When an officer is being investigated for.
Oh, the union. So yes, an officer has union representation, but it's still a criminal investigation. It's just like any other person who is being investigated has a right to have an attorney present. And so it's two-part. The criminal investigation, the person has a right not to incriminate themselves. They have all the rights of any citizen. And then there's the separate incident as an employee of being advised that you have to answer questions because of your employment. We have to keep those things very separate because ours is a criminal investigation. And so people have a right not to make a statement or not to incriminate themselves. The union representative is just sitting there. It isn't any different than any other person who's being interviewed and has some form of representation.
Thank you.
Justin, your hand was up and it's not anymore. Was that on purpose?
No, sorry. So just one question in regards to complaints being made, for them to be considered a use of force, who's making those determinations? I know I've lived here for 30 years. There's been instances where I've seen officers where they put their hand on their firearm. Who's making the determinations whether that can be considered a use of force? And just kind of building off of what is everything that is classified as a reportable use of force?
So a use of force would be engaging in an activity that could cause death or serious physical injury. Putting your hand on a gun might be intimidating to a person, but it's not a use of force.
If I I'm going to jump in on the more administrative, and I apologize. My childcare fell through, so I'm distracted. But EPD has a policy on reportable uses of force. I think that's where you're going with, and policy sort of delineates what needs to be reported as a use of force. And does you have anything else?
No, that's.
Okay, so I've got Erica, you're up. I'm setting a timer for 4 minutes. I set one for Justin, but it only took 1.5 minutes. And then we're going to move on. So this is our last question and answer right now.
So for what I hear, like, you know, I hear something about, you know, if you are behaving like this, you have a gun, you do this, you like, so like, it was said that these people wanted to be shot by the police. But my question is, like, you know, there is, you know, like, what is the, like, you know, like, who protects the people from the police? You know, if the police, best solution is to shot, you know, that's about it. We shot and then we figure it out. Who protects us from the police? Yeah, that was the question.
Was that directed at me?
Yeah, because, you know, like, if, like, I got citizens, you know, I'm not trained to, like, you know, like, you know, when I see something, you know, I get nervous. I am a ESOL, English as second language. In a moment of stress, I just sing it in Spanish. And, you know, like, I am a legal citizen, but for some reason I see a police and I just start getting nervous, and I have all my documentation, but it's just like, you know, my experience with the police, it has not been pleasant. And I'm never doing anything wrong, but it's assumed that I had to be, you know, nervous because, you know, like, there is this presence that is intimidating. So
I would suggest,
I know that, you know, that I know I'm not doing anything wrong. And the police,
what I would suggest
I'm not,
is that
I have not finished. I have not finished.
Communication with.
I have not finished the question because, you know, I'm not trained to respond in this moment, but police is trained in this moment. So why is expecting more from me that I might be a civil person, a citizen, that I have no training at all? Why is expected more from me than from the people that is trained and specialized in all these things, right? That you're receiving all this payment and all this training, you know, why is expected more from me? And, you know, if this is happening, you know, what are my rights as a citizen to defend myself? You know, like, you are a lawyer, you're an attorney, you are the district, like, I need you to tell me this. As a citizen, who protects me from the police?
So if I might answer, number one, the police are people who live in our community. When they're not wearing their uniforms, they're parents, children of somebody else, siblings. These are people who live and work in your community. And so relationship building is what makes a community. And so I would encourage everyone to go to events to meet police officers, or invite police officers to come speak to the organizations that you belong to, so that relationships are built. And so we have a better sense of who these anonymous people in uniforms are. They are people who are your neighbors. And so
but they are not acting as neighbor because my neighbors don't kill me. And that is the problem. That is the main issue. Because, you know, as a member of the community, I wanna feel supported and cared for.
30 seconds, please.
As an indigenous person, I have a different idea what the police do is a relation. And, you know, unfortunately, historically speaking, I'm pretty sure you are familiar with this. Historically speaking, the police have not been friendly with indigenous, Black, and people of color. So I really will invite you to read a little bit more history and understand that these are historical issues. This is not a thing about relationship. This is a 500 years of genocide and control of people of color by force.
And if you want to make the situation better, we need to build the relationships between law enforcement and the community.
Less racist people in the police, right? Maybe more trainings. More trainings, because, you know, like I feel the issue is more than, you know, like making a relationship, because, you know, this is a historical issue that has to be addressed with, you know, with science that will be training, and like maybe getting rid of all the people that have shown historically that they have bias and they have been incriminated in cases that had been racial profiling. You know, it seems
Hi, Erica. Sorry.
I'm sorry. It seems very easy.
Thank you. Thank you to our three guests for coming and not knowing what sort of questions you would be asked. I appreciate your ability to just answer off the cuff. I'm not very good at that. Feel free to stay and watch the second half of the meeting, and also feel free to sign off and grab dinner or whatever you want or need to do this evening. And I'm gonna move us on.
Well, can I just say that if anyone wants to continue the conversation, I am available to do that. Send me an email, it's on the county website, and we can set up a time to talk, so that if you have questions that haven't been answered, I'm happy to do that. I work for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just persecute the criminals. I think that the murderers, persecute them.
You are-
Don't justify them. Persecute them.
Okay. Okay. All right. Hey Marvin, can you mute your phone? Thank you. So next up, it looks like we've got a presentation from the Use of Force Subcommittee, led by Marty.
Before we move on to that, Mo, we've had an item sitting on the agenda for a little while. Ms. Brian Michaels brought a motion a while back asking for abstentions to not count towards the full vote. So with your permission, we can do this before or after the presentation, but before we do any voting on substantive elements this evening. So if you're okay with it, Mo, I'd like to share my screen.
Okay.
Okay. And of course I can't find, there we go. So this is the motion that Brian put forward. And basically the issue was that if a bunch of people abstained on a motion and the total number voting for it were less than half of those present, the motion would fall. And Brian's proposition is that going forward, when somebody does not vote, they will not be counted as present for the sake of the vote. So Brian, if you'd like to speak further on the motion, please go ahead. And we would also need a second before we could consider this.
Thank you. I'm obviously very sensitive to the fact that we just left a very emotional and important issue, and now we're talking about something about as dry as burnt toast. But the issue is, you know, I watched these people abstain, and I think it's pretty clear if they chose to abstain, they did not want their vote counted at all. And most recently illustrated is in our last meeting when Rick Rosetta and Silva were asked to vote on a motion that gave them a stipend for being on the CRB or the police commission. As any ethical person would do, they both abstained because there was a conflict of interest to vote on something that would benefit each of them. The way this abstention is now, they actually voted against their interest when all they were trying to do is be ethical and not vote in favor of their interest. It couldn't be a better illustration of why we need these votes to be neutral, because that's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted it to be neutral. Why, otherwise they would have voted yes if they wanted to vote against, or no rather, if they wanted to vote against their own interest. I think we're really depriving people of the vote, the value of the vote they voted, by making their vote be something than they originally wanted it. So that's why I propose this motion. Obviously, the timing is not great, but that's what this motion.
Okay, I think that Silver has something to add.
Yeah, I would second the motion, and since my name was mentioned, I'll bring it up. I was completely surprised that we did count the abstentions as not just a present vote, but as a negative vote. So I think by and large, a majority of the people on this body abstained because they didn't want to take a position, but I'm not going to speak for anybody else. In my particular vote on that particular motion that Brian just brought up, it's correct. I just wanted to vote present. I didn't want to vote no. And so I would second this motion.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Daniel?
So I'm a bit of a Robert's Rules of Order geek, and I think that I personally don't think that an abstention should. That I think what you're talking about is the difference between a recusal and an abstention, and I would support a recusal not counting toward the total number of people. So a recusal would not count as a no, but from my understanding of Robert's Rules of Orders, an abstention to me means that that person either doesn't understand it or doesn't have enough information. And if that's the case, then if there are an overwhelming number of abstentions, then I would table the motion, refer it back to subcommittee, or I mean, we're so tight on time here that it's difficult to extend the discussion, but perhaps table it and have email discussion or more information on that. So I'd like to offer up an amendment that a recusal would not count as a no, but that an abstention would, and that if there are a greater number of abstentions than there are either no votes or yes votes, that we seriously consider we seriously consider tabling that motion to a later date until people feel more comfortable voting either yes or no.
Brian, how does that land for you?
No, you know, it's turning semantics into some sort of dictatorial rule. Robert's Rules of Order are suggestions and recommendations. They can, and now we're learning we have learned that we can, and we now can choose what parts of Robert's Rules of Order we want and what parts of Robert's Rules of Order we don't want and want to amend. People voted abstention. That's what they did. They said, I abstain. That was their vote. And why we're going to like semantically wrap them into some kind of not with some pretzeled little logic, trying to be kind here, I don't understand. They voted to abstain, and they wanted to be neutral. So let's give them the value of their vote that they chose. I have no personal interest in any of this other than, you know, like I said about the motion for Rick Rosetta and Silva. I mean, clearly they voted abstain. One of them's a lawyer. And so they didn't vote recusal, they voted abstain. And that's the vote they wanted, and they wanted that vote to be neutral. And we can just give them that. We can just give everybody henceforth the ability to vote the way they want. You know, a nucleus has a positive an electron and a proton, which is neutral. So we have a negative, a positive, and a proton.
Okay.
Mo, this is Marvin. I lost you for a bit. So when I get a chance, could I speak?
Yeah, I've got Ibrahim, and then I've got Catherine from the city, and then I'll put you. So, Ibrahim?
Yeah, now that the city attorneys have to speak after me, I'm kind of rolling, not at ease. So I want to support this motion because I think people may abstain because, as Daniel said, they may not have enough information to vote for or to vote against. So to decide that abstention means voting against is kind of like taking away the fact that abstention may be that the person is not doesn't have enough information to vote for. So to me, and like Silver said, he didn't mean to vote against the motion, and for that reason, I don't know what the rules are and what is possible. I would like us to consider the yes or no vote to make the decision instead of having abstention weighing in decision making.
All right, thank you. City Attorney.
So I am very reticent to speak, and the only reason I am is because I am the one that I want to provide a little bit of explanation of how the default was set to how abstentions are being voted, just to provide some explanation. There's two ways in which abstentions can generally be counted. One is present, and one is present and voting. And you'll see groups, they either default to one of two ways. Based on my experience, I defaulted to present. That's certainly, it is what is most important, that as you as a body have decided how you would like, if you would like abstentions to be treated differently, there is no requirement that they have to only be present. I just wanted to make sure that's clear. What's important is that everybody that's voting knows how their vote will be counted. So you really do, when it comes to abstentions, the two general options that are used are present, which was the default that I'm used to and what I've seen, and then present and voting, which is also absolutely used as a way to abstention. So I just wanted to provide that information because I had previously talked about the manner of using present. So.
Thank you. Marvin.
Hi. First of all, I think it's totally inappropriate for anyone to make the assumption how someone is meaning their vote yes, vote nay, or abstention. To try to crawl into someone else's head is not what this is about. When a motion is asked to be called, it is the majority of the yay or nay without the assumption that you know what another person is thinking. So from my position, I would like the motion read and voted up or down with those who choose to vote up and down without trying to assume that I am wise enough to know what someone is thinking in their head on an abstention.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Kevin or Kaz to do a roll call vote because I don't have the roster in front of me. And we're going to vote on the motion as it's written because there's been a motion in a second.
Mo, I can do that. Given my internet remains stable, I'll be happy to give it a go. Shall we?
And please read the motion.
Kaz, if you could read the motion, that would be appreciated.
Oh, there he is.
Although Marvin is calling in, so I'm going to read it out. Proposed by Brian Michaels, seconded by Silverio Mogart, motion on abstentions. All votes going forward shall allow for abstentions to be counted as a non-vote rather than a vote against. If a member abstains, they will be treated as not present for the vote and the majority shall consist of half of all of those voting.
Thank you, Kaz. I'll begin at the top of the list with M's. M's?
Yes.
Daniel. Oh, I'm sorry. Gotcha. All right. Daniel.
Yes.
Betsy.
Yes.
Macy.
Yes.
Thank you. D. I don't think D's here. Ibrahim.
Yes. Oh, Koulibaly or?
Yes, sorry. Koulibaly.
Okay. Yes.
Leah, are you here tonight? I didn't see you. Abdul Rahman.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Ib Hamidi.
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
Joel.
Yes.
Erica.
Yes.
Thank you. Jason, are you here? Justin.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
Severio.
Yes.
Tana.
Yes.
Guadalupe.
Yes.
Marvin.
Yes.
Quentin.
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Leticia, are you here tonight? Sandra.
Leticia o Patricia?
Leticia, I'm going to get to you, Patricia, shortly. Thank you. Sandra. All right. David Tam, are you here? Now, Patricia.
Yes.
Midas.
Yes.
Marty.
Yes.
All right.
Awesome, thank you. The motion passes unanimously.
That's 23 yes, 0 no.
I really secretly wanted someone to abstain just because it would have been funny.
Oh, I know.
All right, so I'm going to move us to the presentation from the Use of Force Subcommittee and pass it over to Marty.
Kaz, would you like to share the slideshow?
One moment, I wasn't actually prepared to. I thought you were going to, but I was about to ask for you to be promoted to a panelist.
But if you are already, that'll be fine. And while you're doing that, I just would like to speak to the committee that we may want to consider this, but looking at how we were handling the motions from community oversight and how it being, I think that's Marvin.
Marvin, can you mute your phone, please?
Yes.
Thank you. It seems bulky to try to do some of these things motion by motion, and I was hoping that if I provide all of you with the slideshow, ideally I would have narrated it, that you can gather all your questions and we can spend some time trying to fine tune it in such a way that we would be able to vote on all of them as a package when we bring it back the next time we meet. So what I'm hoping to do with this time is gather feedback, questions, and input from people on the committee about the motions. And these are 9. We have a few more that we are still working on. But all of these passed unanimously in the subcommittee, and we bring them to you now. So go ahead to the next slide, Kaz.
Sorry.
I just said all that, so go to the next one. Thanks. Okay, so taking them by slide by slide, I'd like to hear from anybody about this motion. These are all intended to strengthen the current policy on de-escalation. The policy that's there right now has a one-liner that says you should use de-escalation techniques, and then it's followed by a second line that says, of course, we expect you to use force. So I like this better. It says that it's something that would be expected in all cases, that you should attempt to try to de-escalate, and officers who fail to employ de-escalation strategies when it was clear that you could have would be subject to appropriate discipline.
So would you like to open out to comments or to continue with the presentation?
I'd like to open to comments.
Okay, so if you have something to say, again, if you could raise your hand in the participants thing, that would be rad. Brian?
There I am. Okay.
Okay.
From my experience, and it's pretty extensive from a lot of different perspectives as a lawyer, as a person, and being involved in different political episodes and watching how police don't de-escalate. And as we saw with Mr. Rodriguez and his killing, it was started by an officer grabbing him while he was walking down the street minding his own business. That's obviously the very trigger of escalation. How we get them to recognize their own escalation practices is to demand that they use de-escalation. Because once you grab somebody, the obvious reaction is they pull back, and then you have a confrontation. And we all know who loses that confrontation. So, you know, to discipline them for escalating is I think necessary, and to enforce upon them to not trigger an event by failing to employ de-escalation it's just paramount to how so many of these things turn into an ugly conclusion. And I fully support this and hope we can get officers to understand that de-escalation is possible, because we as citizens, we don't have that option. That's all.
Thank you.
Rick, can I just ask Brian, did you have anything that you wanted to change in this?
Well, you know, to me, it's more, how do we punish them when they don't follow policy?
Okay.
These words are obviously much better. I mean, I like officers who fail to employ de-escalation will be subject to appropriate discipline. That pretty much satisfies it. You know, I would use forceful words like shall de-escalate in every instance. But the real issue is whether there's ever a discipline. And I think that's what we're all talking about here, is how do we get discipline into the system so that police will know that if they break their own policies, there will be consequences. But clearly this is the key
30 seconds, Brian.
to a lot of the violence that we witness. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm gonna ask that we are providing feedback on word changes or edits and not comments on whether we love it or don't right now, because we're gonna run out of time. Rick, Rosetta, and then Justin.
I have two questions, Marty. Number one is, did I understand you to say that without stating it in these proposals that you've distributed to us, that you plan on scrapping the entire de-escalation policy already in place?
No, these would be amended to the policy in place.
I suggest that you make these as recommendations to the police commission rather than attempting to draft these yourself.
Okay, all of these are drafted based on other cities' policies, and where it says in parentheses, add to, and then it has a listed EPD policy, it's to make a point of reference as to where it's relating to the existing EPD policy. And everything that we recommend here is going to go to city council, and then they're going to decide what to do with it. So they may make that decision that you just suggested.
Well, it's my concern is it's difficult to tell what part of the policy you want to change to add these things that you want to add, and I don't know where they fall in, but maybe I'm just quibbling, but I see it as difficult to do, but I'll leave it at that.
Justin?
Yeah. So first of all, you have to forgive me. I'm not familiar with the policy 820.3, but just in the wording, failures, on part B, only after attempts at de-escalation have been exhausted. At what point are we determining whether the attempts have been exhausted? I mean, because that's going to be different for each individual. And so it may very make sense to be as specific as possible, because we're leaving that up for a very broad determination. Because I can say I asked the man to stop and then pull the gun and say I exhausted my de-escalation, and that very well can mean a different thing for somebody else. So I just think we need more detail there, because it's just very broad.
Do you have a suggestion of an example of more detail?
I might put it on the third party that's maybe possibly involved with the officer, depending on what their actions are. I mean, I don't have a specific answer for that. The wording here is just very broad to me, and I don't know. I don't have a detailed description of what I would change it to, but I definitely think it might be need to be given some thought. So, and I'll think about it as well and send you an email later on as well.
Thank you. Silver?
Did you say Silver Mo?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Hey. So part of the conversation that usually takes place around the EPD commission is speaking to just that, Justin, that we don't want to be too detailed, because at that point it's sort of a process where it limits the interactions. So the language that was put into place from this subcommittee, which I was a part of, I accepted the fact that it was broad in the sense that there is no specific point. Each point, as you mentioned, will be different. So I just wanted to speak to that.
Oh, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. I think we're on to the next slide.
Okay, unreasonable force. This is something that other districts and municipalities have written in their code. We do not. We have code that talks about what establishes reasonable force. This could be something that could be amended to that. The ones here state things like using force for punishment, retaliation, using force based on bias, and an officer shall never use force solely because another officer is using force. So just to sort of draw a line in the sand and say, these things are clearly not acceptable. So questions and comments on those?
Looks like Lindsay and then Brian.
So I'm not a subject matter expertise on this, but I think that I remember not in the de-escalation policy, but in other parts of the police operations manual, which is like this thick, that it addresses these first two issues. And in the case when you want to draw attention to those within a different policy that's nested, which we did in the last police commission meeting, sometimes you would then refer to the other policies within the nested policy. So I would really appreciate, before we vote on this, if somebody who is much more familiar with the police operations manual would give us some technical input on those first two, because I am believing like much earlier within the operations manual, like way before policy 800, that those two things are addressed, but I don't know the specificity of it and would really want to know more before making a recommendation.
Okay, Brian.
Sorry, Mo, just to clarify on Lindsay's request, that we'll run that through EPD so that when we come to vote to these at the next meeting, you'll have that information.
I mean, I would need it well in advance, so I have time to review it, just to be clear, like it's really difficult to juggle and get something 24 or 48 hours early. So if that's going to be included, if we could have that as soon as possible, that would be.
Okay, Brian.
Hi, I have two comments. One, when the first police presentation happened and they put the policy manual up, the only de-escalation policy was that an officer shall endeavor to de-escalate. And when I asked them, don't you think require would be more a stronger word to impose to require to get officers to use de-escalation? He obviously agreed. So I think the de-escalation language is needs to be as strong as required. Because I was mistaken about what my comments were supposed to be on the first one. I will do that on everyone from now on. On this here, I emailed to Marty the law on self-defense and the justification of using force in self-defense, so that if a defendant is charged with using force and his defense is self-defense, the language goes, and this is from State v. Sandoval, 2007 Oregon Supreme Court case, a person is justified in using physical force upon another person to defend himself, obviously, or herself, from what he or she reasonably believes to be the use or imminent use of unlawful physical force. In defending, a person may only use that degree of force which he or she reasonably believes to be necessary. I don't know why the police would not be governed by this premise of law, that the only way they get to use force is justified is to defend themselves from what they reasonably believe to be the use or imminent use of unlawful physical force. That's the language I would like to see in here. That's all.
Thank you.
Can I respond to that? I believe that the policy that this would be appended to says something very similar to that. It does list that the reasonable use of force should be in the same kind of circumstances.
Okay, next slide.
All right, so on deadly force, again, this would be appended to what's already listed for when officers can use lethal force or deadly force. They should not use it to apprehend a person who's suspected of a minor or non-violent offense. Not use it to protect property. And this is the third one is important for well checks on someone who's suicidal. They should not use deadly force against someone who's a threat to themselves but no one else. And they should not use deadly force against a restrained person, and they should warn people whenever possible when they're about to use deadly force.
Rick Rosetta.
Marty, do I understand you in A of that UF 103 to mean that if you have a 17-year-old individual with a gun pointed at you, threatening to kill you, you can't use deadly force against them?
No, it's not a minor person, it's a minor offense.
Not a minor or nonviolent offense? Okay, that's confusing.
So that should be clarified.
I believe so.
Thank you.
Okay. Brian.
I would recommend the same law that applies to self-defense for deadly force. Defendant is not justified in using deadly physical force against another person in self-defense unless he or she reasonably believed that the other person was using or about to use unlawful deadly physical force against him or her, and or committing or attempting to commit a felony involving the use of threatened imminent use of physical force against a person. It raises the standard that allows deadly force to be used by citizens, and I think it could also raise the standard that deadly physical force could be used by police officers. So in Mr. Rosetta's example, if somebody is pointing a gun at an officer, certainly he has the right to use deadly physical force. But that's not always the time that, that force needs to be seriously a deadly force before you use deadly force against another. And we know that the police don't always do that. But they are held to an easier standard, and I'd like to see them held to the same standard as the rest of society. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I just want to do a quick time check. We have 10 minutes left of our meeting time, and we need 5 of that for creating the subcommittees moving forward. So that being said, back to you, Marty.
Okay, so use of force reporting. So we heard reference earlier in this meeting, there is some code existing that lists everything that's considered reportable force. These would be added to that. I'm trying to find my copy of it. Did anybody have notes from the presentation or they had questions? Or okay, here it is. Yeah, so the gist of this is to increase it from unholstering and pointing the weapon. I mean, from using the weapon to actually including unholstering it or putting your hand on the gun, displaying the weapon. All of those should also be reported and tracked. And part of the discussion that we had around this in the subcommittee was to help us track situations where we can see a pattern where officers are showing force to some populations more than to others.
Any comments on this one? Lindsay?
Again, it would be super helpful to have, so I was under the impression that the unholstering of tasers or firearms are reportable uses of force under our current procedures. So I would just like to check that. Also, I think the word display is a little bit confusing because like if I see an officer walking down the street, they're displaying their weapon, and I don't think that's what you mean. So I think if you were going to, if you're going to go the route of making specific language recommendations as opposed to referring more general ideas to the police commission, for example, to consider it, then I think that specific words are going to be really super important.
Okay, the document that I had hoped would be added, that I referred to on the last slide, includes the 3-question format, and in there, there's some notes under what's the issue that says, however, the display or verbal threat of discharging firearms and active use of lethal weapons, of a weapon is also a use of force and can have a chilling effect on persons to whom such a threat may be implied. So emphasis on the police possession of weapons, such as an officer placing their hand on a holstered firearm during an interaction, can be perceived as threatening and intimidating. So that's what it's referring to.
That and I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, that it's not only the active use of a weapon, but the ability to use it and the brandishing of it does certainly impact me as a person, right? And my level of fear and this. So I'm not trying to be like obstructionist. I'm just saying like a word like display, I think it could be taken out of context and someone could shoot it down and say, well, we're not going to do that because when an officer's walking down the street, they're displaying their weapon. You know what I'm saying? So I'm trying to figure out like just how to.
Right.
Anyway, thank you for all your work on this. I know it's really difficult.
All right. How many more of these are there, Marty?
Mo, this is Marvin. Briefly.
There are not. Go ahead.
Okay. Marvin.
Mo?
Go ahead, Marvin.
As a former officer, I can tell you it's that last piece right there will create dangerous situations for police officers. They will wonder whether or not they should put their hand on a gun or pull a gun in a situation where you have other individuals who are either brandishing their weapon or a weapon. So to have that officer now be more worried about an adverse effect from a discipline because someone in this neighborhood was frightened by the fact that that officer put their hand on a gun. Police officers are given guns for a specific reason. And whether I agree or disagree with what types of guns should be out there, that particular statement will place officers in danger, just so you know.
I have a question for you. Is it because they don't want to report it that they would fear repercussions?
No, they don't want to report it. That's not the issue. It is if you have a policy that an officer is not to put their hand on a gun because it appears to be threatening, and that officer does that, then the reverse will happen, that an officer will not put their hand on a gun when they should have and not have to pull it. It is when you're dealing with individuals out there who are overly aggressive, they see a sign like that as a weakness. Simply, a lot of times, if you put in a dangerous situation, placing your hand on a gun or on a baton or on an axe for certain individuals will
can I clarify?
The amount of confrontation needed. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So this section on use of force reporting, it doesn't prohibit any of these behaviors. It just says they should also be reportable. So if you
with
need
the
to use
disciplinary
force,
action taken if done so?
Say it again.
Will they be disciplined if they do so and it's reported?
This policy does not state that. It just says that it needs to be reported. So however that is, if it's on blue team or whatever, it's up to the department how they address it.
Okay.
We
There
are
are 9 in
I'm
total.
doing, and we just did number 5. So we have 3 minutes left. And we really need to figure out these other subcommittees. And I feel like a broken record asking you all for 10 minutes of your time. But can I have 10 minutes of your time?
Brian
To
here,
use
I
them
say
like-
yes.
All right.
Sure.
Go for it, Marty.
Okay, so moving on to what's next, annual training? Can you move the slide for me, Cass? There you go. So this one just basically says if we're going to make a lot of changes, we need to make sure that the police department knows about these changes. So the 2 parts of this are that there should be a training every year and that all in-house training should be updated to reflect any of these changes. Questions or comments on that?
Yes, I want to maybe add something that training, yearly training, include a panel of the police victims, victim impact panel. Don't know how they call it. People who have been who are family members or who have been victimized by the police. So we give them the opportunity to come meet with all the police officers and share their experience with the police.
Yeah, I've heard this before. It's similar to what happens with drunk drivers, and drunk
Yeah,
drivers have to.
Like something like that.
I think that one could go into training, and this maybe address.
So that, yes, I agree. That could be handled by hiring and training.
Yes, I thought about maybe pertain to a different subcommittee, but since we're talking about deadly force, I wanted to throw that in.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you. I see no other hands up. So next slide.
Okay, duty to intercede. This one I felt strongly about because it helps to set a culture within the police force. Already, our police force encourages officers to report what they see as excessive, and this just makes that policy stronger. So the first one is about rewording the existing policy so that it's clear that if you did not intercede in time to stop it, you can also interrupt it. The way it's worded, that's not clear. It also adds 2 more statements about that you can intercede before the events or you can intercede during the events. And then there's a whistleblower kind of protection clause that an officer won't get retaliation for intervening, and that if there's evidence that you did not report something, that they would be subject to appropriate discipline.
Questions, comments?
I see that some people need to leave, and it would be ideal if our subcommittee could collect information and feedback now so as to present this in a way that takes everyone's input into consideration.
Yeah.
I would just say that the last sentence, officer who failed to intercede to prevent excessive force, and I'll think about to report it should will be subject to. Okay, I'll send that by email. I'll send it by email.
So are you saying, Ibrahim, that they should be culpable if they don't report it, but if they don't intercede, maybe that we shouldn't have it be subject?
They should have the same disciplinary action as the person who is actually doing that, who's actually using excessive force. Failing to report puts you at the same disciplinary level as the person who is actually using the excessive force.
Okay, as in aiding and abetting by not doing something.
I see Daniel and then Brian.
Yeah, first I just wanted to ask if we could send any additional email, any additional comments to the facilitators that could be forwarded after this. And I just wanted to respond to what Ibrahim said, which is that if in that scenario that Ibrahim just said, it seems that there's a built-in incentive that there would be a built-in incentive that, well, if I don't report it, if I don't report it, then the other officer won't get in trouble, and then I won't get in trouble. If by not reporting it, the only discipline I would get would be the discipline that the other officer gets, then there's a built-in incentive in there for me not to get that officer into any more trouble than he might otherwise be. So I would disconnect those two and have one discipline for not reporting and another discipline, and have that be separate from whatever anything else is.
I agree with you, Daniel. Maybe we should say that if not reporting it, maybe have an even harsher punishment.
Yeah, or I mean, it's whatever it is.
Maybe then, because I think the intent is to have people to report what they have observed on the field.
Yeah, obviously, we want to encourage them to report.
So yeah, probably increase the disciplinary action.
All right, Brian.
Pardon me, the second line on B and C, which says with this policy, I think we can say with the de-escalation policy and this policy shall blah, blah, in each instance.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. Marty, I thought I understood the numbering system and now I am lost. How many more are there?
We should be getting close. Where are we, Kaz? We've got demilitarization. I know that.
You've got 3 more, Marty.
Oh my gosh.
Wow, that's a lot.
All right.
So maybe I just at this point would like to say, did people get time to look over the slides and did they make notes, and would they like to share those with the subcommittee? And maybe have a show of hands of how many people have feedback to give to us. Okay, I'm seeing a few.
So I would ask that we move to table these pieces.
This process.
To the next meeting back as an ad hoc committee, and allot for 10 minutes only, given the opportunity for people to be able to look at this, and then we can present it as a full motion.
I second that.
All right, it sounds like, well, do we have any discussion?
Well, I think at this point this was just a presentation. We don't have any of these proposed motions on the table, so there's nothing to table. Am I correct?
Well,
that, Kevin? Mo?
Yeah, Daniel, I'd say you're correct. So this is just a discussion, bringing information from the subcommittee to the main committee. And, it doesn't look like we're going to get through this discussion. Marty has suggested that committee members send suggestions, comments, questions to the facilitation team, who will then forward them on to the subcommittee. And I think that's going to be the process.
Okay, yeah, so we don't need Silver's motion to table. We can use that.
All right, but
for the
Silver,
subcommittee.
Can I ask,
I was under the impression at the beginning of this conversation that it was a motion to bring these to the body.
can I ask that the facilitation team release the full 3-question format to the committee?
Sure.
Yes.
Absolutely, Marty. We can get that done. Yep.
Thank you.
and we'll put this on for 10 minutes at the very beginning, not the very, very beginning, but the beginning of the next meeting. I'm going to pass it off to Kaz to chat about subcommittees.
Okay, so there's a couple of issues here. The first of which is the hiring and training subcommittee. Alain has resigned from the ad hoc committee, so we need to find somebody to replace Alain on the hiring and training subcommittee. I also have not had any contact with either Midas or Dee. And this means that the committee has not been able to find a time to be quorate. The full committee would be empowered to change the makeup of the committee altogether, or to simply replace Alain. So if there's anyone who wants to put themselves forward to replace Alain, and Midas, I see you're here tonight. Are you still able to serve on that committee?
Yes, I am. I thought I had filled out the doodle poll, so I will get back on my email.
All right,
tonight
I'll
and
check again at my end because I've had a few of those come in. So perhaps, yeah, that's
Okay,
that's out
cool.
of
Well,
date,
I'll get back on that. Yep.
but- okay, thank you very much. So do
course.
we have any volunteers to take Alain's place on the hiring and training subcommittee? I don't see anyone, in which case we will drop committee membership down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members, which will make it slightly easier to achieve quorum. And then we also have the Independent Investigation and Prosecution Subcommittee, which is the last of the subcommittees that we're intending to hold. And I've had expressions of interest from Daniel Borson, Ibrahim Koulibaly, and from Brian Michaels on that, which is 3 out of the 7 slots. Does anybody else wish to serve on that committee?
I will wish to serve.
Okay, Ems. Anyone else wishing to serve on that committee? I'm not seeing anybody else. So we have 4 members given to serve on that committee.
What committee is this? Can you please repeat?
This is the Independent Investigation and Prosecution Committee.
I can be part of that one.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Okay, if there are no other members, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on that subcommittee. And that's everything from me. So Mo, if you want to entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved.
Aye.
Do we have a second? Listen to all of you voting. Okay.
And I don't believe we need a roll call for that.
We do not need a roll call vote. We don't even need a second. So folks, thank you very much for your time tonight. Really appreciate the testimony, the input, and the comments that we heard tonight. Really appreciate our guests, our content experts. Thank you. And thank you again for folks who are listening in. And of course, to Mo and Kaz and the rest of the committee. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Night.